Hannah Lewis never thought a single touch could change her entire life. As an ER nurse at St. Mary's Hospital in Chicago, she was used to long shifts, putting her patients' needs above her own emotions. But everything changed on one fateful night, when she met Robert Whitmore. Robert was a billionaire in the medical technology industry, a genius with a sharp mind but a severe aversion to touch. In his world, physical contact was unnecessary and unsafe. He had spent his life building an empire, but he had never let anyone get close to his heart. Hannah and Robert came from two different worlds, yet fate brought them together in the most unexpected way. A minor injury, a late-night shift, a fleeting moment, and everything shifted forever. She never realized that one simple touch would open the door to love, loss, and a choice that could change her life forever. Sometimes a single touch can change the course of two lives forever. Hannah pulled her lab coat tighter, trying to shake off the exhaustion after 3 consecutive night shifts. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital always carried an air of tension, like the calm before a storm. The automatic doors slid open. A group of paramedics wheeled in a stretcher. But Hannah didn't pay attention until Dr. Patel, the lead physician on duty, called her name. "Hannah, we need you in room 3. She moved quickly. As the door swung open, she locked eyes with the man sitting on the examination table, the most striking person she had ever seen. Robert Whitmore sat rigidly, his steel-gray eyes scanning the room warily. His expensive suit was stained with coffee and blood, but what caught her attention most was how he stiffened the moment she stepped closer. Dr. Patel reviewed the file. "You have second-degree burns on your right hand. Nurse Lewis will clean and dress the wound." Robert gave a curt nod, but Hannah noticed his fingers tightening around the bedsheet. She approached carefully, her voice steady but soft. "I'm going to examine your hand now, Mr. Whitmore. I'll be as gentle as possible, but let me know if anything hurts too much." Their eyes met. Just for a moment, a flicker of something passed through his gaze. Surprise, maybe? Hannah reached for his injured hand. The moment her fingers brushed his skin, he flinched violently, jerking his hand away. It was instinctual, immediate. "I'm sorry," Robert said quickly, his voice rich but uncertain. I'm not used to being touched." Hannah hesitated, then carefully wrapped her fingers around his wrist, gently, patiently. "That's okay," she reassured him. "We'll take it slow." As she worked, she noticed how his breathing gradually steadied, his tension easing bit by bit. When she finished, he stared at his bandaged hand, then at her. "Thank you," he said quietly. "No one has ever treated me with such care before." Neither of them knew it then, but that single touch would ripple through their lives, changing everything. 3 days had passed since that fateful night, yet Hannah couldn't shake the memory of the strange patient with cold gray eyes and a visceral reaction to touch. She buried herself in work, caring for patients, handling paperwork, and most importantly, worrying about Diana, whose condition was worsening. But no matter how busy she was, Robert Whitmore's image kept slipping into her thoughts. "Hannah," Claire, one of her colleagues, called from the front desk. "Is someone here asking for you?" Frowning, Hannah walked toward the reception area and stopped in her tracks when she saw who was waiting. Robert Whitmore. Tall and composed as always, but this time without his pristine suit. Instead, he wore a dark sweater and slacks, making him seem slightly less untouchable. She quickly composed herself. "Mr. Whitmore?" He gave a small nod, hesitation flickering in his gaze. "I came for a follow-up on my injury," he said, but something in his tone told her that wasn't the full truth. Nodding, she led him to an empty examination room. As she unwrapped his bandage, she noted that the burn was healing well, but the tension in his body remained. Like every touch from her was something he had to endure. "Your burn is healing nicely," she said. "Are you still experiencing pain?" "No," he replied, but his eyes never left hers. Silence stretched between them until Hannah decided to break it. "I have to ask, why did you really come here?" Robert's brows furrowed slightly, as if even he wasn't sure of the answer. "I don't know," he admitted after a long pause. "I just wanted to see you." Hannah's heart skipped a beat. No one had ever said that to her before, and certainly not someone like Robert Whitmore. She didn't know how to respond, but before she could find the words, he stood, adjusting his sleeve as if trying to mask his own uncertainty. "Either way, thank you," he said, "and I suppose I'll be back in 3 days." Hannah watched as he walked away, a strange feeling settling in her chest. He might not understand why he came here, but she did. Between them, something was forming, something strange, unexplainable, but impossible to ignore. Hannah tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Robert Whitmore. She didn't understand why a patient she had only met once left such a lasting impression, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. Reality was waiting for her at home. Deanna was getting worse. This morning, the doctor informed her that her sister's kidney function had deteriorated significantly. If they didn't find a treatment option soon, her condition would become critical. Hannah stared at the growing pile of medical bills on her kitchen table, feeling a crushing sense of helplessness. Across the city, Robert stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, staring at his bandaged hand. He couldn't understand why a simple touch from Hannah haunted him so much. He was Robert Whitmore, a man who never let anyone close, never allowed anyone to touch him like that. And yet, he found himself wanting to feel it again. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant appeared on the screen. "Would you like to cancel your attendance at St. Mary's Charity Gala tonight?" His eyes lingered on 2 words, St. Mary's. And he didn't think twice. "No, I'll be there." That evening, Hannah had no interest in attending a gala, but hospital management had requested all staff to participate in the fundraising event. She slipped into a sleek navy dress, the only one she owned that didn't look like a nurse's uniform. When she entered the opulent ballroom, she barely paid attention to the wealthy guests around her. Until she saw him, Robert. He stood near the bar, still exuding confidence and authority, but his eyes were scanning the room, searching for something. And then he saw her. For a brief moment, the entire room seemed to fade away. The truth unfolds. "Hannah!" She turned as Claire approached, her face filled with shock. "Do you even know who was just looking at you?" Hannah frowned. "Yes, Robert Whitmore." Claire gaped. "You say that like he's just some regular guy. Hannah, do you know who he actually is? A businessman? Not just a businessman, he's the CEO of Whitmore Medical Technologies, one of the richest men in the country." Hannah felt her blood turn cold. Robert was one of the most powerful figures in the medical industry. She couldn't believe she had treated him like just another patient. When she turned back, Robert was still looking at her, his expression holding something she couldn't quite decipher. She didn't know why he was here, but one thing was certain: things had just become much more complicated. Hannah felt dizzy. Robert Whitmore wasn't just a random patient. He was one of the most powerful men in the medical industry. And now he was standing across the room, looking at her in a way she couldn't decipher. What was she supposed to do? Ignore him? Pretend she didn't see him? But Robert made the decision for her. He walked toward her, his steps steady, but something in his eyes uncertain. "Hello, Hannah," he said, his voice deep yet slightly tense. She swallowed. "Hello, Mr. Whitmore." He frowned. "Call me Robert." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, Robert. Why are you here?" Robert paused for a moment. Then he said simply, "I don't know, I just knew I wanted to see you." Hannah's heartbeat stuttered. This was a man who avoided people, avoided touch, but now he had sought her out, openly admitting he wanted to see her. But before she could respond, her phone rang, shattering the moment. She glanced at the screen. The hospital was calling. "Sorry," she said quickly, answering the call. Dr. Patel's voice came through, sounding more urgent than ever. "Hannah, it's Diana. Her latest test results don't look good. She needs to start a new treatment protocol immediately." Hannah felt her world tilt. "But what about the cost?" she asked, her voice cracking. We don't have enough money." "We'll do what we can," Dr. Patel sighed. "But you know how this works, Hannah. Without stable financial backing, we can't guarantee long-term treatment." Hannah bit her lip, helplessness closing in around her. She couldn't lose Diana. She had to find a way. An unexpected proposal. Robert had heard every word. The moment she ended the call, he spoke. His voice firm, unwavering. "Let me help you." Hannah turned sharply. "No, I can't take your money." Robert stepped closer. "This isn't about money. This is about you, about Diana." She shook her head. "I can't let you do this." "Then marry me." The time stopped. "What?" she gasped, eyes wide. Robert took a deep breath, as if making the most important decision of his life. "If you agree to marry me, you will never have to worry about Diana's medical expenses again." Hannah stared at him, her heart pounding. She knew Robert wasn't a man who made impulsive choices. "So then why are you doing this?" she whispered. Robert met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw something raw in his expression. "Because I love you." Hannah couldn't breathe. Robert's proposal echoed in her mind like something out of a dream. "Marry me." This wasn't a romantic proposal. There was no ring, no kneeling, just a stark reality. He was offering her a deal. "Robert, you can't be serious." Her voice trembled. His eyes never wavered. "I've never been more serious in my life." She felt like she was caught in a storm. "Why?" She shook her head, trying to make sense of it. "You can help me in so many other ways. You don't have to do this." Robert stepped closer. "Hannah, if I simply handed you money, you would never accept it." His voice was steady, unwavering. "But if we're married, you'll never have to worry again. Diana will get the best care. You'll have everything you need." Hannah clenched her fists. He made it sound so simple. "And what about you?" she challenged, searching his face. "What do you get out of this marriage?" Robert had prepared for this question, but when he spoke, his answer wasn't what he had originally intended to say. "I get you." Hannah froze. She studied him, searching for a lie in his expression, but all she saw was sincerity and a fear she couldn't quite name. "You don't know me." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I want to." Silence stretched between them, a tension so palpable it felt like something real. Robert took a deep breath, delivering his final words. "Marry me, Hannah. Not for money, not out of obligation, but because I think you're the only person in this world who can change my life." Her heart ached. Could she refuse? Or was this fate pulling her towards something greater? The news exploded like wildfire. Robert Whitmore marries. Unknown nurse, love, or business deal? From ER to estate, a real-life Cinderella, or just a scheme? Hannah wasn't prepared for this. She knew Robert was famous, but she never imagined her life would be dissected by the media. Reporters swarmed outside the hospital. Colleagues whispered behind her back. Even when she tried to ignore it, the headlines were relentless. How did she seduce him? Does this nurse really love him, or is she after his fortune? Hannah felt suffocated. But Robert didn't waver. At a sudden press conference, he stood before a sea of reporters, his voice unwavering. "I know there are plenty of rumors about our marriage." His gaze was steady. "But the truth is, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love her." The murmurs in the room stilled. "And if any of you have a problem with that, well, that's your issue, not ours." Hannah watched the TV screen, her heart tightening. Robert had just defended her against the world. After the press conference, things seemed to settle. The media still buzzed, but the worst had passed. Hannah felt relieved, but there was still one thing she wasn't ready to face. What were she and Robert really? This started as a deal, but now every time he looked at her, every time he held her hand, it felt like something else entirely. Hannah began to notice the changes in Robert. He no longer flinched when she touched him. Before, his body would tense whenever her fingers brushed against his. Now, he didn't pull away. One evening, they sat together on the couch, watching TV after a long day. And for the first time, Robert was the one who reached for her hand. Hannah stiffened, surprised. He didn't say anything, just held her hand, as if to show that he was trying. And that made her heart warm in a way she couldn't explain. Another night, when Hannah came home from a shift, she found Robert asleep on the couch. She stepped closer, intending to cover him with a blanket. But as she leaned down, Robert's eyes fluttered open. Instead of recoiling like he used to, he simply looked at her, his gaze softer than ever. "You don't have to be so careful with me anymore," he murmured. Hannah's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know when it happened, but she could feel it. Robert was changing. He wasn't afraid of her anymore. Maybe he never feared her at all. Maybe what he feared was what she made him feel. And now he was ready to embrace it. Diana lay on the hospital bed, the morning sunlight streaming through the window, casting a gentle glow over her frail frame. Hannah sat beside her, holding her hand tightly, her heart a mixture of hope and fear. Today, the doctor would reveal the results of her long battle against illness. The door opened, and Dr. Patel stepped inside with a rare smile. "We have good news," Dr. Patel said, his voice filled with warmth. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. "Please, let it be what I hope for. The treatment is working. Deanna's kidney function is improving." For a moment, Hannah couldn't move. Then, like a dam breaking, the tears she had held back for months came rushing out. She turned to Deanna, gripping her frail hands. "Deanna, did you hear that?" Diana's lips trembled before they curved into the biggest smile Hannah had seen in years. "I'm going to get better," she whispered, her voice raw with disbelief and joy. Robert, standing at the doorway, watched silently. The overwhelming happiness on Hannah's face, the way she clutched her sister as if afraid to let go, it did something to him. A strange warmth spread through his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. This was what truly mattered. Robert stood at the doorway, silently witnessing the moment. He wasn't used to warmth like this, to the raw beauty of unguarded happiness. But as he watched Hannah clutch her sister in a tearful embrace, he realized something. This feeling of belonging, of doing something that truly mattered, this was what had been missing from his life. That evening, the three of them sat together on Robert's balcony, breathing in the crisp night air, feeling a sense of peace they hadn't known in months. Hannah leaned against his shoulder, gratitude shimmering in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Robert didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached up, for the first time willingly touching her cheek without hesitation. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, his fingertips grazing her skin, a silent declaration that he was no longer afraid. "I've never done anything in my life that felt as meaningful as this," he murmured, his voice low but sincere. "And that's because of you." Hannah closed her eyes, feeling his presence, his warmth, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. She knew, deep down, that they had changed each other in ways neither of them could have expected. Diana giggled from beside them. "You two are like a romance movie." Hannah laughed, and for the first time, Robert didn't shy away. Instead, he smiled, a real, unguarded smile. For the first time in his life, he no longer felt alone. That night, under the glittering city lights, a new chapter of their lives quietly, beautifully began. 1 year later, their lives had changed forever. Hannah stood by the window of Robert's penthouse, cradling a small baby in her arms. Their daughter, Sophie Whitmore. She had Robert's cold gray eyes, but her mother's warm smile. Behind her, Robert stepped closer, gently placing his hand on her back, a gesture he once never dared to make. "I used to think I would spend my life never letting anyone close." His voice was quiet. "But then you touched me, and I could never go back to the way I was." Hannah smiled, turning to face the man she loved. "Do you regret it?" she whispered. Robert looked at their daughter, then back at her. "Never," he murmured, "because you taught me how to love." Outside, the city kept moving, but here, in this home, they had found peace.